The ground shook for the third time that morning, and Eli Dawson knew the earthquake was about to get worse. He was underground, deep beneath the massive oak tree in the network of rooms he'd carved out over the past year. The root system above him, thick as a man's thigh in places, groaned and flexed with the earth's movement. Dust fell from his ceiling. His oil lamp flickered above ground. He could hear screaming. The town of Burwood was collapsing. Buildings that had stood for decades were cracking apart. The general store's false front crashed into the street. The church bell tower swayed dangerously. Wooden structures built on solid ground that everyone thought was stable were being torn apart by seismic forces no one had predicted. But down here in Eli's underground dwelling, the place everyone called zero, the thick oak roots that formed the ceiling and walls were moving. Yes, but not breaking. They flexed like living ropes, absorbing and distributing the earthquake's energy. The earthen walls, reinforced by centuries-old root networks, compressed slightly but held. The structure that everyone said would collapse at the first tremor was doing exactly what Eli had designed it to do, moving with the earth rather than against it. Another violent shake. The root system above groaned louder, roots rubbing against each other with sounds like wooden ships in a storm. But they held. The network that had taken a century to grow and that Eli had spent months carefully excavating around, never cutting a major route, only working with the spaces between, was proving to be the strongest framework imaginable. When the shaking finally stopped, Eli climbed the earthen stairs that spiraled up through the root system to his hidden entrance at the base of the oak tree. He pushed open the concealed door, cleverly disguised to look like just another cluster of roots, and emerged into chaos. Birchwood was devastated, not completely destroyed, but severely damaged. Houses had shifted off their foundations. Chimneys had collapsed. The town's main street was cracked with fissures. People were stumbling around in shock, checking on neighbors, and pulling children from damaged buildings. And standing in the middle of it all, untouched and unshakable, was the massive oak tree. And beneath it, invisible to anyone who didn't know, was Eli's underground home, completely intact. Sheriff Morgan approached, his face pale with dust and shock. Eli replied. Morgan stared at the oak tree, seeing it differently now. But to understand why a man would spend an entire year excavating a multi-room dwelling beneath a tree's root system while the whole town mocked him, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to when everyone was certain Eli Dawson had lost his mind. It started the previous spring when Eli purchased the old McGregor property. 5 acres dominated by what locals called the grandfather oak, a massive tree estimated to be over 300 years old. The trunk was 15 feet in diameter. The canopy spread wider than a house, and the root system everyone knew went deep and wide. What are you planning to do with that old tree? Asked Mayor Patterson when Eli filed his property papers. Live under it, Eli replied. Under it? You mean build a cabin near it? No, under it. I'm going to excavate living spaces within and beneath its root system. The news spread through Birchwood like wildfire through dry grass. Eli Dawson, the strange newcomer who'd arrived last winter with enough money to buy property but odd ideas about how to use it, was planning to dig a house underneath a tree. But people don't build for disasters they've never experienced. So they laughed and Eli began digging. His method was painstaking and strange to observers. He didn't just excavate randomly. He spent weeks studying the root system, mapping clears, throwed it, and understanding its structure. Only then did he begin carefully digging out spaces between major roots, creating rooms where the natural architecture allowed. The entrance was hidden at the base of the oak, disguised to look like a natural root formation. From there, earth and stairs spiraled down and branched into multiple chambers. A main living area roughly 12 feet in diameter, where the ceiling was a network of thick roots that Eli left completely intact. A sleeping chamber to one side, smaller and more intimate. A storage room where the cool, stable temperature would preserve food. A workshop area. And even a small space for bathing with clever drainage that followed natural root channels. Dawson's building an ant colony became the town joke. No, he's becoming a badger, going to hibernate down there all winter. I heard he's planning to grow mushrooms down there and live on them like a troll. Even Even children mocked it. They dared each other to approach the grandfather oak and peer into the entrance, though none were brave enough to actually descend into what they imagined as a dark, collapsing hole. But Eli continued, working mostly alone. The excavation was incredibly difficult. Every shovelful of dirt had to be done carefully to avoid damaging roots. Major roots were treated like sacred beams, cleaned and preserved, and incorporated into the structure as natural supports. Smaller roots were carefully trimmed. The tree's natural healing processes allowed it to seal the cuts. "You're killing that tree," Victoria Hammond said. "Watching him work one day, all that digging around the roots, it'll die, and then your whole underground house will collapse." "I'm not killing it," Eli replied, showing her his careful technique. "See, I'm working with the root system, not against it. I've removed dirt that was compacted and poorly draining. I've improved air circulation around the roots. I'm actually helping the tree thrive. That's not how trees work. Actually, it is trees in nature often have animals excavating around their roots. Badgers, foxes, other burrowing creatures. The trees adapt. The root systems actually become stronger because they're forced to reach deeper and spread wider." Victoria wasn't convinced, and neither was anyone else. The consensus in Burwood was clear. Eli Dawson was wasting time and money on a project that would fail spectacularly, probably killing him in the process. The construction took all summer and into fall. Slowly, Eli's underground dwelling took shape. He installed timber supports where necessary, but relied primarily on the natural root structure. He created ventilation shafts, cleverly hidden among the trees above ground roots. He dug drainage channels that followed the tree's natural water management system. The walls were earth, but not raw dirt. Eli plastered them with a mixture of clay, lime, and sand that hardened into a smooth, almost stone-like surface. The floors were packed earth covered with flat stones where appropriate. The root ceiling was left natural, the thick wooden beams creating a cathedral-like effect. By late fall, the dwelling was complete. Eli moved in his belongings, furniture, supplies, books, tools, descending into his underground home while the town watched and waited for disaster. "Give it one heavy rain," they said. "The whole thing will flood, and he'll drown down there." The rains came every once. The dwelling didn't flood. In fact, the drainage system Eli had designed, following the trier's natural channels, worked perfectly. Water flowed around and past the dwelling, never accumulating. "Wait until winter," they said. "He'll freeze down there." Winter came, and Eli discovered what he'd predicted. The earth at that depth maintained a relatively stable temperature year-round, with minimal heating. A small stove vented through one of his hidden chimneys. The underground rooms stayed comfortably warm. Above ground, Burwood shivered through a brutal winter, burning massive amounts of firewood to stay warm. Below ground, Eli lived comfortably. His root reinforced earth, providing natural insulation that put timber walls to shame. But temperature stability wasn't the property that would prove his critics wrong. That came later during the winter when the ground everyone thought was stable decided to move. The first tremor came on a Tuesday morning, a small shake that rattled windows and made people pause in their daily routines. What was that? People asked each other. Nothing, Mayor Patterson assured everyone. Just a minor tremor. We get them occasionally completely normal. But Eli, who'd studied geology as part of his engineering education, recognized the signs. Small tremors often preceded larger ones. The timing, the character of the shake, the way his underground dwelling had responded, all suggested something bigger was building. He tried to warn people. Patterson laughed, but Eli knew what he'd felt. The tremor had traveled through the earth with a characteristic wave pattern. His dwelling connected directly to the bedrock through the trier's deep taproot route, had transmitted the vibration clearly, and that vibration suggested more was coming. 2 days later, the main earthquake hit, as described at the beginning. The ground shook violently for nearly a minute. Buildings cracked. Chimneys collapsed. The stable ground everyone trusted betrayed them, moving in ways structures built for static loads couldn't accommodate. Underground, Eli experienced the earthquake differently. The movement was intense, yes, but distributed evenly. The root system flexed and absorbed energy. The earth and walls compressed slightly, but didn't crack. Earth, when properly supported, is actually more flexible than rigid building materials. The entire dwelling moved as one unit with the earth rather than trying to stand rigid against it. When the shaking stopped and Eli emerged, the contrast was stark. Surface buildings showed significant damage, but his underground dwelling, the one everyone said would collapse, was perfectly intact. The aftermath brought revelation. As townspeople assessed damage and realized they'd need shelter while repairing homes, an obvious question arose. Where could people stay? My place, Eli offered. It's undamaged. The main chamber can hold quite a few people temporarily. Under, someone objected. After an earthquake, there could be aftershocks, which my dwelling has already proven it can handle. Eli pointed out, your damaged houses, on the other hand, might not survive another shake. The logic was undeniable. Over the next few days, as aftershocks continued to rattle Birchwood, 12 families took shelter in Eli's root haven, as they'd started calling it, the mockery now replaced with wonder. They descended into the earth, expecting a dark, cramped hole. Instead, they found spacious rooms with cathedral-like root ceilings, stable temperatures, and an almost profound silence. The earth above muffling all outside noise. It's like being in a church, Martha Wilson said, looking up at the massive roots that formed the ceiling of the main chamber, a wooden cathedral. The grandfather oak has been growing for 3 centuries, Eli explained. All that time, its roots were creating this structure. I just revealed it and added living spaces. Thomas Brennan, the builder who'd called the project crazy, spent an hour examining the root structure, the earth walls, the clever ventilation system. He finally admitted. Eli replied, during the week, families sheltered in the root haven while repairs proceeded above ground. People began to understand what Eli had built. It wasn't just a dwelling. It was a demonstration of principles most people never considered. Young Timothy Chin, who'd been one of the children mocking the project, asked questions constantly. Eli showed him spaces left in strategic locations. As word spread beyond Burwood, visitors came to see the dwelling that had survived what conventional buildings couldn't. Engineers wanted to study the root structure. Builders wanted to learn the excavation techniques. Even university professors arrived to document this unusual form of architecture. It's not entirely new, Eli explained to a professor from the Territorial University. Humans have lived underground for millennia in caves, in cliff dwellings, in excavated homes. What's different here is intentionally using a living root system as the primary structural framework. But doesn't that make it vulnerable? The tree could die. The tree is healthier now than when I started. I've improved drainage, reduced soil compaction, and removed competing vegetation. And even if the tree did eventually die, the root system would remain intact for decades. These roots are as thick as my thigh. They're not disappearing anytime soon. The professor published a paper on Eli's root haven, calling it, quote, 75. The attention led to others attempting similar projects with varying success. Eli's worked so well partly because of his careful engineering and partly because he'd chosen a tree with an ideal root system. Mayor Patterson, humbled by the earthquake and the failure of the town's conventional buildings, asked Eli to consult on rebuilding efforts. What would you recommend? Should we all dig underground? Not everyone needs to, Eli replied, but we should incorporate underground elements, storm cellars with proper root reinforcement, food storage in earth spaces, emergency shelters that use the earth's stability. And we should build surface structures with flexibility in mind, some ability to move with seismic activity rather than rigid resistance. The rebuilding of Birchwood incorporated many of Eli's suggestions. Not everyone built underground dwellings, but many added root reinforced cellars, earth-sheltered storage, and flexible foundation systems that could accommodate ground movement. The grandfather oak became a town landmark with Eli's dwelling beneath it a tourist attraction. Visitors could tour the upper chambers by appointment, seeing how human habitation and natural root structure had been integrated seamlessly. Years later, when Eli was an older man, a young architect came to study the root haven for her thesis on alternative architecture. Mr. Dawson, you built this when everyone said it would fail. Why were you so confident? Eli smiled, running his hand along the thick root that formed part of his ceiling. Because I understood that this root system had survived 3 centuries of storms, droughts, and stresses I couldn't even imagine. It had proven itself. I was just working within a structure that was already succeeding. But the earthquake was unexpected. You couldn't have predicted that. I didn't predict the earthquake specifically. I prepared for instability in general. When When you design for worst-case scenarios, you're ready for whatever specific disaster arrives. What would you say to people who think underground living is impractical? I'd say they're thinking of underground as a limitation rather than an opportunity. Yes, you give up some things. Easy street access, large windows, conventional visitors, but you gain things surface dwellers never have. Constant temperature, profound quiet, protection from weather and seismic events, and a connection to the earth that most people never experience. When Eli Dawson died peacefully in his underground home at the age of 74, the dwelling passed to his nephew, who maintained it exactly as Eli had designed it. Eventually, it was preserved as a historical landmark, the grandfather oak protected by law, the dwelling beneath it maintained as an example of what Eli had called root architecture. The plaque at the entrance, carved into stone and set among the roots, reads, "The Root Haven, built by Eli Dawson, mocked as foolish, proven as wise. The deepest roots create the strongest shelter, and those who live beneath them learn that safety sometimes means going down when everyone else builds up." Modern sustainable architects study the Root Haven as an early example of earth-sheltered architecture and living building integration. The dwelling has now survived over centuries. Multiple earthquakes, countless storms, and temperature extremes have destroyed conventional structures in the area. But in Boywood, now a small city, they remember the simpler lesson, that strength isn't always visible above ground, that safety sometimes means descending when instinct says to climb, and that working with natural systems is often smarter than building against them. The Root Haven wasn't just a dwelling. It was proof that wisdom requires looking beneath the surface, literally. That which seems strange and foolish can be profoundly sensible when you understand the engineering, and that sometimes the safest place to be when the world shakes is not in a rigid building reaching toward the sky, but in a flexible shelter held by roots that have been growing toward the earth for centuries. Visitors still tour the Root Haven, descending the earthen stairs, ducking beneath massive roots, and entering chambers that feel like being inside a living organism. Because, in a sense, they are. The grandfather oak still grows above. Its roots still hold the ceiling. And the lesson Eli taught still resonates. That mockery is temporary, but roots are deep. That underground doesn't mean buried when you build with understanding. And that the person everyone calls crazy for digging down might be the wisest builder of all. When the earth decides to remind everyone that solid ground is an illusion and true stability comes from moving with nature rather than standing rigid against it.
If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next ones. We'll meet again on Hill Destiny with another tale. Take